Hi, in today's video we're going to be looking at layouts in Power Apps, how we can be more effective at making our apps look and feel a lot better for our users. But first, quick intro. My name is Colin Cook. I work as an Office 365 and Power Platform consultant. In these videos I share with you tips and tricks that I use on a daily basis when I'm building real live production apps. So let's jump straight in and have a look at today's tips and tricks. So today we're going to be looking at layouts, how we can lay out our apps a little bit better, how we can make the user experience a lot better, and how we can actually save ourselves a lot of time doing things these ways. So the first thing I want to explain is just some basics. For those of you who know this, maybe just a quick reminder. For those of you who don't, this will be something that you really need to understand in order to build these apps. So the first thing we need to do is just add something into our app. Now the way most people build their app, they'll add in what they need, plonk it where they need, open the width, change the height, maybe change the fill color, change the text, change the height. There's our header. Now this isn't a problem. Then we can start going adding different things in. We can lay things out where we are, and that's one of the powerful things about Power Apps. We can just chuck stuff wherever we want. The problem is when I've seen people build apps is they tend to start to look a little bit messy. And I think one of the easiest ways we can stop them being messy is trying to think more about how we lay our apps out and just be a bit more systematic and logical in our approach. So these tips that I'm going to show you will really help you think about that. And it's also going to help you in the long run, because the way we build apps this way will allow us to then go back and change one thing and affect everything else. So we don't have to keep going back and resizing, moving everything around if we have to add something new in or if we're not happy with something. So let's get started on how I would do this. So let's take a look at our header, for example. I would normally always have a header and a footer in my app, potentially. Sometimes I won't. So if we take a look down the right hand side here at the properties, now everything that we put into our app will have these four properties. The first one is the X. So the X is the left hand side position of the component. So the far left hand side is 0, and then all the way to the right, depending on how big our app is, the number over there will be the far right hand side. And then with our Y, that's our up and down. So from the top being 0 and the bottom being the height of our app. So if I move this around, you'll notice the X and Y values changing down the right hand side. So here we've got it at 985X, which is 985 pixels from the left hand side to the left hand side of this object. Now that's important. That isn't to the middle of this object, it's to the left hand side of this object. And then our Y is 420. So that's the number of pixels from the top to the top of this object. Again, it's important, this is not to the middle of the object, it's to the top of the object. It's one of the main mistakes that a lot of people make when they're lining things up. They forget that it lines up the left hand side and the top. We've also got the width and height. So we can set the width and the height to whatever we want. So if I drag this out, you can see the width increases, and if I drag it down, the height increases. Those are the four things we're going to be working with today. They're really simple, but very effective. So even without moving into the pieces I'm going to talk about, what we should be doing regardless is if we're setting something to a certain width and height, we should be using the actual properties down here because we want them to be uniform. There's no point having something that's 103 height and another one might be 102. If we're going to be setting things, let's set them to round numbers, 500, 100, maybe 550, 100. Just so that everything has more unified approach. It will just look a lot better. Positioning wise, we should be using the X and Y's as well. So if I want this, for example, to appear at the top left of the screen, I need it to the far left, which is 0x, and then I need it to the top, which is 0y. So immediately now I know that that is in the top left, which is quite simple. But as we move into the app and we want it to line up further down and further along, it's going to make more sense to use those a bit more effectively. Now, one of the great things that we can do as well with Power Apps is we don't have to use physical numbers. We can reference certain things and we can make multiplications, divisions, additions based on those. And those are the things we're going to be doing. So let's start with something really simple. This is my header. So my header, I actually want this to be the full width of the app. Now I could just drag it out. I could remember the number that my app is, and I could make it the width of the app 1366. But what if my app changes later on? For anyone who's built an app and then has to change the ratios for whatever reason, you'll notice that everything needs resized. So you have to go back through your app. Spend hours rechanging everything. Let's be lazy. Instead of using a specific width, let's go in here to the width. And now what we can do is we can reference the app. So app has its own properties, and one of the properties is the width of the app. So let's reference app.width. Now we know that that's going to be the same width of the app no matter what changes. If I change the width of my app, so does my header. Everything works perfectly. Now for height, so that we don't get too confused, I'm just going to set that to a specific number there. That's 100. But later on, we're actually going to change how that works. So we've set that to the app.width, and you can see down here now we've got this FX symbol. So that means that this is actually a formula that's creating the width of this. So we know that that's not a specific number. And the reason that's important, if we hover over that, we can see it's FX. If I change the size, I'm going to lose my formula. Now, when I'm building my apps, I'm trying to use formulas for as many things as possible, because then that means I can literally change one or two things and the whole app will completely adjust with me. So if I see FX, I want to click on that, check what the function is, and change that instead of actually dragging around the size of the object. So let's take a look at a footer. So we'll copy this exact object. We can see here it's got app.width, which is the same. Our height we don't want to change, but we actually want to move it to the very bottom of the app. And for that, we want to look at the Y. Now, we want the Y to be at the very bottom of the app. Now, initially, you could be forgiven for thinking, okay, that's fine. I'll just use app.height. The problem with that is, as I said before, is it's actually aligning the top of that object to the Y value. So that Y value is the very, very bottom of the app. And the object, as you can see, it's trying to go off the page, but it can't go off the page, and it hasn't lined up quite right. That's because our object actually has a height itself. So we have the app.height, which gives us the very bottom of the app, but we need to come back up ever so slightly, and we come back up using what we call self. Now, self refers to the object in which the formula or the property we're doing. So by doing self, I can then access the properties of the object itself, and so we want self.height. So now I've gone app.height to the very bottom, but I've removed the height of the object itself. Now, by doing it this way, as I say, if I now change the height of that object to 200, the Y itself will adjust. The height obviously is adjusted, but it stayed in the right place. So that's exactly what we need. We don't have to do anything else. We didn't have to adjust it from 100 to 200 and then change the Y from app.height minus 200. We're just using formulas. And this is the basis for everything we're going to do. And honestly, if you start doing it with your apps, you'll notice the small changes just make everything seem a lot cleaner and easier to use, and you're going to save yourself so much time in the long run. So we've done the top and the bottom. Now let's take a quick look at the left and right, just as an example. So let's call this one left. So we will colour that in just so we can see the edges, which make it a lot easier to understand what's going on there. So I want this object to appear on the far left hand side. So as before, I'm going to be using the properties, but I'm going to be using the X property. So the X is left to right, the Y is top to bottom. Now I want my X property for left to be 0. That's going to align the left hand side with the left hand side of my app. Perfect. Now let's grab another one. Now I'm going to be lining up this one with the far right hand side. So again, we go to our X, and we can use, instead of app.height, app.width. And you can see what's happened. So what we talked about, this is lining up the left hand side of my object with the far right hand side of the app, which is not what we want. So what do we need to do? We need to remove the self width. And then quite simply, that is exactly lined up with the right hand side. So even if I change the width of this, 500, it always stays in the same place. Drop it back down, 100, same place. Perfect. So there we go, the basics. Now, these are just floating in the middle again. So I have set the width to a certain number. I've set my X, and I haven't set my Y yet. Now, generally what I'll always do is pick one thing that I will line everything up with that doesn't really change too much, and I'll start working my way through. It does get more complex, but if you understand the basics, you'll start to get the idea. So here I've got my header. Now my header is never going to move. It's always going to be in the same place, and I want everything to build from that. So this on the left hand side, let's say for example, I want that to fall exactly underneath my footer. So if 0 is the top, then the bottom of my header is going to be its height. So in this I can actually refer to, and let's name these a little better so that we can understand. Let's name this to header. Let's name this to footer. And this is good practice in your apps anyway. You don't want to be looking for label 7.1, label 7.2. You want to be looking for a specific name, something that's a little bit easier to remember. So now in my left, I want to say the Y is going to be header.height. Now that's lined up exactly underneath. If I change the height of my header to 50, that moves with it. And my whole app will, if I start building on those principles, if I have everything lined up underneath, then everything's going to move with it. And I'm only going to have to change one value. So immediately you can see how quickly you can build your apps and how clean they can start looking. Let's do the same with the right hand side, just so we understand what we're doing. So X is already a function. We've moved it to the far right hand side, and we want to do the same with Y. So we want that to be, well, trying to type that in the middle of nowhere, which is not going to work, in our function bar, header dot height. Bosh, done. And again, if I change the height, both the left and the right will move with it. 100. Okay, so what if I wasn't using the header as the top? I mean, the header is a very simple example because it's already 0, 0, and we're going from 0 down to the height. But what if we want to go all the way to the bottom? So let's say, for example, this left-hand side one, we want to align it exactly with the top of our footer. So slightly differently, if we set this to footer.height, I mean, yeah, it's going to line up, but it's only going to line up the top left because it's just taking the height of the footer, which is no good to us. So what we actually need to do, first we need to find the height of the app. So we need to go to the very bottom, exactly what we did with the footer. And then we were minusing the self.width, sorry, self.height. So if I take my self.height, so that's jumped up. But then I actually want it to be above the footer. So what we need to get used to doing here is we will put that first one in brackets. We don't need to do it for this equation, but it will help later on if we use brackets. What that does is it will just put that lost all my words today. It will put that calculation in its own self-contained calculation. So it will calculate that first and then anything afterwards. So if anyone understands basic maths, if we start putting lots of multiplications, divisions together, it's going to work it out in a random order. This says work that number out and then do what happens next. So we don't need to do it for this, but it's just to explain how some of these things work. So now we want to take away, so we've taken away our app.height and self.height, and we've got it up just above the bottom of the app, but now we want to take away the footer.height. So there we go. So now we've moved it from the bottom up the size of the footer and then up above it. So there it lines up perfectly with the bottom left. And if we change the size of our footer, that moves up and down with it again. Stays perfectly clean, perfectly nice. Let's move that up to 150. Again, that jumps up with it. Perfect. Now, that can be done with literally everything. So if I wanted to add in loads of different, let's say, inputs. So let's say I've got text input. Now, for argument's sake, I'm just going to put this in here for now, but I'll show you how we do that as a calculation separately. Now I want these to look really neat and tidy in the center of this page. So I could, as I said before, just drop these in. Okay, that's and it does give you all these great guidelines, but if I ever have to move things around, they just start to become messy. And I have seen people just accidentally have things slightly different, slightly apart. Here's an even better approach. So let's not worry about the X for now, but let's take a look at the Y. So let's grab that input, take the Y. Now we want the Y to lead on from, let's say, the header.height. But we don't want it to be exactly at the top, so let's just add a little bit of padding onto that net for now. Let's maybe not too much. Add 100 onto there. So we've got 100 between the top and the bottom. Now our second one, let's get that lined up nicely. So first text input, let's just rename this text input 1. So we know that one's the one at the top. Rename this text input 2, that's the second one, and text input 3. So we've lined that up perfectly. We've lined it up in the middle manually for now, but we're going to work on that in a second. Now let's line this one up. So our Y here, we could just go back to the top and go, okay, we want to go 100 down plus the width of that plus the width of that, but we've already got an object that has been given a specific place and we can line it up with that. So let's take text input 1.y, that puts it directly on top, plus text input 1.height, that's going to put it just below it, but we want a little bit of padding in there. So let's say 25. So again, we can encapsulate these. So we say work that out definitely first and do that. Now that becomes more important when we're working with division and multiplication because it's going to mess things up. But for just subtraction and addition, it's not too bad. So there we go. So we've got 1, 2, and then again with 3. Now let's just get rid of that. Let's just copy and paste this, move it back into the middle, rename that 3. If we look at the Y for that, so it's exactly the same. So text input 1.y plus text input 1.height plus 25. But actually we want to line this up with 2. So let's just change that to 2. And there we go. We've got 3 perfectly aligned text boxes. Now that already looks nice and clean. We haven't really done anything with it yet. And also it does mean, okay, if I want to add something in, I go, okay, that's a bit too low or it's not low enough. I go, okay, just drop that to 150. Everything moves with it. So now, again, if we ever need to come back and change our app or add something in, we've made our life a lot easier and everything looks amazing already. So those are the basics. So hopefully that was quite clear, and hopefully even without the next set, you can really get to using that and it will help you building your apps, help you save a lot of time. Now the next thing that we want to get into is centering, and this is where a lot of people get confused as well. Again, back to the fact that our X actually lines up the left hand side of this object and our Y lines up the top of this object. So most people would be forgiven for thinking if we wanted this to be in the middle. So let's say for argument's sake we didn't put it straight in the middle, but we want to find the middle. Now we could do what we did, we drag it along and at some point it tells us where the X is or the middle is. But what if our app changes, or what if we're not looking for the middle of the app? What if we're looking for the middle of something different? Now what we need to do in order to do that is we need to make the left hand side gap and the right hand side gap equal, but we need to understand that the object itself has its own width. Now, there's a very simple way to do this, and it's easy to show you with the app because that's 0 to the app width. So we take the app width, so that's the entire width of the app. If we were to just divide that by 2, we're going to end up offset slightly because we haven't taken into account the fact that the object itself has its own width. So what we need to do, and this is where we need to use our brackets, take our app.width. Now we need to take away the self.width. Okay, now what that's done is that's given me the exact size of the white space. So when we talked about the white space on the left and the white space on the right needing to be equidistant. So now we know that we've taken the entire object that we want to make, find the center of, taken the width of the object off that we're putting in the center, So we have a figure that is the exact size of all that white space. We simply then just need to divide that by 2. Now that is exactly in the center. If we change our app width, it's still going to be in the center. That's exactly what we need. So now we've got our X and our Y's lined up. Probably lost the Y on that one. Let's just set the Y in here back to header dot Y plus 100 or header dot height plus 100. So now we've got it 100 down and we've got it in exactly the center of the app. Brilliant, and we haven't had to put a single number in. These are all functions now. So they're always going to calculate themselves and they're all going to line everything up for us, which is amazing. If we change the width of this, 400, it's still going to be in the center. So you see, it very quickly just made that calculation for us. I didn't need to readjust it just because I changed the width of it. It did everything for me. Let's set that one just back there to 350. Right, so now we need to do the same for these, but actually we could go through them and go, okay, put the same X in here. Let's take that one out, pop it in here, and we could do the same for all of them. But what I tend to do, like I said, is I take one object that is the core part of it, and then I build around it. So my top text input, actually that already has the X. So why do I need to recalculate it? Why do I need to calculate that 3 times? That will become important as we have more things in our app. If we're making constant calculations, we're increasing the overhead on performance. So let's not bother. Let's just say, I want the X for this to be exactly the same as text input 1 dot X. And there we go. Same again. Now, depending on how you build your app and how you feel comfortable, we could make that the same as text input 1, or we could make that the same as text input 2. Doesn't really matter, it's just falling down, but I always take that top left one because I know these are always going to be in the same place. Now also, they're all a different width. So let's just go again, refer to text input 1 dot width. Same for this text input. Change the width. Text input 1 dot width. Now we have something that's in the center, 100 pixels down, and everything the same width. If I change one thing, 500, for the width of my text box here, everything changes. How cool is that? And then if I change my Y, just up this number, 300, 200, perfect. Now, one of the things that I also do, in order to not have to go in and go, okay, I want to change that to 100, 200. And there is another video, which I'll put the link to in this video, which shows you how I set branding in my apps. Now, I do exactly the same thing where I use the branding for my sizes. So let's just set a new variable called styles, and for the sake of this, we'll just create an object that has padding 100. Okay, now let's just run out on start. And text input 1. Now instead of putting in here the 200 or the number, I can refer to my styles.padding. Now I don't want to go into too much detail about how I do that. There is another video, like I say, which I'll link to during the video. So now all I have to do is just change the padding in my app, run on start, and everything will move. And generally, if I'm working with things like this, I would set a specific padding for the number of in between these text inputs. So let's call that, let's change this to padding 2 and do 25. Oh, what did we call that? Padding 2. Now if we run up on start, so now here where I did the Y for this text input, I added 25 on the end, but now I can just refer to styles.padding2 and it'll be 25. And again we would have done the same for this. 25. Now I might be looking at my app and I can see here, I go, okay, I don't like that. I want that to be about 150, and I want the padding between those to be actually a little bit more, so maybe 30. So let's change those, run that. Now everything's moved 150 and everything moved 30. So quite easily I've got two numbers now. My entire app can run off of those different paddings, and we can have left, right, centers, everything. So those are extremely powerful and going to make your life a lot easier. So I would get used to building your apps always using those sorts of calculations. Now we're going to look at something a little more complex. We're going to look at a gallery and how we can use all of those different things to make our gallery line up properly as well. So let me just grab a little piece of code here. What I'm going to do is just going to create a collection which has some items in it. It's got apples. Then we know how many they've got, what type they are, and there's just a few in there. So it's not really important. It's just to show you how I'm going to line up stuff within my gallery. So let's move this up. Actually, let's just keep it in here, but move it to the top. And just run that 50/30. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a gallery here. So just a blank gallery with my demo data. Now again, most people would just drag this down, move it across. Okay, that's in the middle, perfect. That's where I want it to be. But we might want to change things, so let's not do that. Let's say the X. Again, we want this to be the center. So exactly what we put in here. We can just say put that in the middle, or we said before, we know that text input's in the middle and it's going to be part of that. Maybe we move this to the left. Let's just make this text input 1 dot X. But that hasn't worked, has it? Because the function that we're using here uses self.width, and this is a different width. So what we actually need to do is take that and plonk it in there. And there we go, that's in the center. Now I'm going to make this a specific width just for the purposes of this. So it's 640 at the moment. Let's make it a nice round number, 800. Actually, let's make it smaller because we don't have a lot of data, so it might look a bit weird if we stretch it out like that. Let's actually make it smaller. There we go. Let's set our Y to text input 3.y plus text input 3.height plus text input 3 right, plus our padding styles dot padding. There we go. So it's got the same padding between it, and it's just below the text input height and text input 3. Now let's connect this up to our demo data. Boom, boom. There we go. Now we just need to add some labels in. So there we go. There it is. That's our apple. It's a fruit. And there's 10 of them. And let's bring that up. So there we go. Got a lot of objects in there. Now again, that looks great and you could just do that, but let's be clever. Over here on the right hand side, now this is a vertical gallery, so template size decides how big each of those templates is inside of our gallery. So I'm going to set this to a round number, 40. Template padding of 5, not a problem. Now I've inserted 3 things in here. So in our most basic form, actually we don't want to have to set the width, because what if I change the width of my gallery? Then nothing changes. So what we can actually do is we can use the function parent. Now what parent does is it looks for the control above it, which in an item in a gallery is the gallery itself above it. In the app itself, it's the app above it. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in a gallery, we can just use parent and we can say the template width. And that would set that entire thing to the gallery's template width. So we can see we've got parent template width. If we go back to our gallery, that's 40. So it's setting that label to the template width. But we've got 3 things in there. We don't want to set it to the whole width. Let's divide that by 3. And then let's rename this to gallery title. Let's rename this one to gallery type. And let's rename this to gallery quantity. Oh. And then this one, the X, we want that to be gallery title dot X plus gallery title dot width. Now, the important thing to notice here is that the X for Apple, which is the title, is 0, but it's not on the far left hand side of our app. And that's because within the template, any label that we use, 0 is actually the far left hand side of the gallery. So it's the left hand side of the parent. So we're working from the left hand side of the parent forwards. So we don't have to add to where the gallery is and then add that on. We can simply use that as a reference point. It just saves us a lot of time. So this one, its X is 0, but for fruit, we're going to say find the X of the left hand side and then add the width, which we don't need to. We could put 0, but at some point we might move that out from the left hand side. We might create padding, we might add something else. So if we reference the actual object itself, it just makes it a lot easier to come back to and do later. And then we'll do exactly the same here. And because they're all going to be the same, we're just going to say take the gallery title, gallery type dot X plus the gallery type dot width. Okay, and then we just need to set the width, so it's set to 150. Actually, it's going to be exactly the same as title, because we just divided it by 3. So let's just take the width, gallery width dot title, and quantity, let's do the same, width gallery dot width. Okay, so something's not right. Okay, we've got our Apple width, parent.template width divided by 3, our fruit width, gallery title dot width, looks fine, lined up the X. Okay, so we've got our quantity, which has got the right width, but our X, we haven't set that yet. So we need to set our X to the gallery title, gallery type dot X plus gallery type dot width. And that's what happens when you don't script things. But here we go. That's all in line now. So you can see that everything fits in there. One thing that I also have done is I've just taken out the padding from each one. Let's just chuck something back in there. Chuck something back in there. We don't need to remove those. So we need to line those up nicely. Wonderful. Okay, so now we've got 3 perfectly aligned and ratioed items. Now let's go back here and let's change the width. 600. Everything recenters, and these are stretched out. Now because they're left hand aligned, obviously it doesn't look very good, but if we center these up, now every time we change the width, let's drop that back down to 400, everything goes in and out. So if we now change the size of our gallery, everything changes inside. Perfect. We don't need to keep messing around with everything inside it. But let's go one step further. I mean, not everything within the actual gallery item needs to be that big. I mean, quantity, look at the size of that compared to this. Our title could be huge and we could end up with all of this space used up. So when I have different things in a grid that I need to have different sizes, we could start getting confusing and say, okay, we divide this by this and we figure that out. It's actually a very simple way. It's off the back of what we call the grid methodology in web design, which basically involves dividing that width into an exact sized set of grids, and then we're going to say how many of each of the squares in the grid that item is going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring up Microsoft Excel so I can explain this a little bit clearer, because you can't make it as visual in this. So let's bring in Excel. Now let's say, for example, I have my line. I know that there's going to be 3 items in there, but I want one of the items to be actually just a little bit smaller than the others. So I might use the grid method and say, okay, I got 1 item, 2 item, and my last item, which I want to be smaller. If we was to create a grid of 4, let's just add some grid lines in here, or borders. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's add one more in there. So if I have a grid of 5, then I can make my title 2 of those, my type another 2, and then use my last one just for my quantity, because I know that's going to be smaller and still maintain perfect ratios. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grids, but the first 2 are taking up 2 parts of that grid. The second one is taking up 2 parts of that grid, and the last one's taking up 5. So this is the method that I use. There's plenty of other methods. If you want to use pure maths and work it out yourself, that's fine, but this helps me to understand how to separate things out. And if I want to change things later, I can increase my grid size, reduce my grid size, and use different variations of it. So how does that work in Power Apps? Let's jump back over here. So what we're saying is we actually want, with our title, to divide this into 5 sections. So that's one of my columns, and these are all one of my columns, but let's put that in brackets. As we said in my layout here, I want to use 2 of those grids for the title. I want it to be 2 of those squares. So we just times that by 2. Now, because we're changing these differently, we can't obviously refer to the same thing again. So we would say for our fruit type, actually that can be, because we want to use 2 again. So I could just go in there and put 2. And sometimes I do that, because then it means I can change these down and adjust them around, and you'll see why in a moment. Now quantity, this is the one I want to be smaller. I don't want to use 2 for that. I could times it by 2. I'm going to put it in here, but we don't need to divide by 1. I just want it to be one of those grids. So now everything is split perfectly logically in there, but we're using a grid method. So we've got 5 squares, title is using 2, type is using 2, quantity is only using 1. So again, if I change the size of my gallery, 600, look at that. We get more for our title, less for our quantity. What if I wanted to use more? What if I thought, okay, I want to use a bigger grid. I want to use a 6 grid. Let's go and change all of these to 6. Now there are 6 squares in my grid. I only want quantity to use 1, but I want my title to be a lot bigger. So title uses 3, type uses 2, quantity uses 1. So now we need to make sure that those all added up. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that equals the same number as the number of squares that we've chosen to use in our grid. Otherwise, if I start changing this to 4, it's all going to go squiff, because we haven't got that many grids on our actual gallery. So we just change it to that. So perfect. Let's just add some fill in on these so that we can see a little bit better what's happening. Green, red. So this is taking up 1, 2, 3. Fruit's taking up 2. Quantity's taking up 1. And we can quite easily make those adjustments. Now everything's perfectly in line. This whole app, everything is working from an X to a Y, a width to a height. We're doing divisions within our galleries, and this lends us on to something that I'm going to show you in one of my next videos, is how we create a gallery that expands as items are added. So at the moment, this gallery is just a specific height. But again, I know there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items inside of that. So my height, realistically, we can set to the gallery 1 dot template height, which is the height of that template, times the number of items that are in there. We can actually use the gallery 1 dot all items, or the count rows gallery 1 all items. So now if there's more items in there, that's going to expand, and later on I'll show you how we can actually have an add button that goes up and down, and everything changes within the app, and it looks really cool, and everyone thinks we've created something magical, but actually we're just using really simple maths to do these things. So yeah, that's going to be really handy for you. Let's see what else we've got here. That pretty much covers everything in there. Now there's one other quick thing that I want to go over, but actually it's something that isn't going to be used too much in the future. And the reason for that is there's something called containers, which is going to start being used. It's pretty much the go-to template in Teams now. It hasn't quite come out as production live over in our Canvas apps, so I tend to steer away from it until it does come live. But you'll notice back in one of the videos that I did quite a while ago, I used something called adaptive containers. So I'm going to quickly go over that now, but I just want to understand kind of how that works and how you could use it. But realistically, we're probably going to use containers anyway. So let's chuck in a new screen. Now, what I tend to do with my apps when I'm building and designing them, in order for them to be clean and fluid, is I tend to try and break the actual screen down into different sections. So I don't want to just go, okay, everything's on here and I stick it all over the place. There may be specific things that I use for specific places. To show you how I do that, I'm going to chuck in some rectangles here. So for example, what I might do is I might say, okay, this is going to be my toolbar. As I said before, I generally have like a header with some stuff in. Got my header. Let's just change the color of these so that we can understand what we're doing. And then I may have my main section here and my second section just here. Okay, let's just change the color of these so that we can see exactly what's going on. Nice purple. So I've laid out my app now. I did it manually. I went in and just said, you know, this is the top, this is the left, this is the bottom. But realistically, what I would be doing is saying, okay, XY is such and such. Height is 100 for the header. Width again is app.width. Perfect. Now my left hand side, I want this to be X is 0. The Y is going to be, let's rename these, is going to be header, which we'll have to call something different because we've already got that name on our screen. Header layout, we'll call that. And we'll call this, say, toolbar layout. So the Y is going to be header layout dot height, and the height of it is going to be the app dot height. Take away the header layout dot height. So those two are perfectly lined up. Now the width of this, actually I'm going to do this by ratio. So I don't want to just say that's the width, have to work this one out and this one out. I'm using the full page. So let's split it into three sections. Let's say out of 100%, I want this to be maybe 20 to 15%, and then I'm going to do 40, 40. Now the easiest way to do that, if you don't know how to work out percentages, just do it this way. This is going to make things a lot easier for you. So I want this to be app.width. Now we could go divided by 100 and times it by all, or what we could do is we could just times it by a decimal place. So 1 is 100, anything in between is the percentage. So if I want this to be 15%, for example, I times it by 0.15, that's 15% of the width. Simple. No need to worry about complicated maths, which we don't want to have to do. Let's rename this one. So let's say this is main section layout, just to keep consistency with the naming, and rename this one main section layout. Oh no, subsection layout. Okay, so main section layout, we want the height of that to be the same as the toolbar layout dot height. We want the X to be the toolbar layout dot width, because it's just left from the left hand side X, the width of it over, and the Y, we want that to be the same as toolbar layout dot y. So that moves it up perfectly. And then again with the width, so we've already used 15%, that leaves us 75%. In fact, let's just make this easy for ourselves. Let's make that 10%. We probably won't fit much in there, but it just makes it easier for you guys on the demo to understand. Width. For this one, we want to use what's left over. So we've already had 10% of it used up, which leaves us 90%, half of 90%, 45, at dot width times 0.45. Simple. Subsection layout, so let's just quickly do this one. So the X is going to be the main section layout dot X plus the main section layout dot width. Perfect. And the Y, again, we'll just make that main section layout dot Y so that it fits exactly. The height, there we go, main section layout dot height. And the width, now I could set it to the main section, but I might want to change these around. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to set it to the exact number at dot width times 0.45. Okay, so now I've got this layout, but what's the purpose of it? I mean, it looks great. Now what I tend to do is, in case I build an app on top of this and then my subsection I want smaller, when I'm building this on screen one and I'm adding it to all the different places, I'd have to then work out where my section is and add everything on. But if this is on a separate screen, no one's going to see it. No one's going to see it, and I'm going to be able to reference it still. So what I can actually do, let's just reduce the width of these to something smaller. So we say we're going to put this in our subsection. Let's make it just 150. Small little input. Let's just drop the width of our gallery down to something like 350. We can still read everything. Okay. But now, when I set the X for this, I did the app.width self-width divided by 2. So I went for the center. But actually, I want this to be in the center of where my main section would be. So I want it to be here. So what we can do is we can actually go, okay, I want this to start from main, oops, let's just get rid of it to start again. So we'll build it from the beginning. So main section layout.x. So that's my starting point, the far left hand side. Now I want it to be in the middle of that. So I need to, in brackets, work out where the center of that is. So that's the main section layout.width. So that's the width of the main section. Take away the width of my object here. So this section here gives me the divisible white space between the main section and the self.width. Divide that by 2. Now we just need to use brackets again here so that we're working everything out in order. So we work out the main section width divided by self.width, that gives us the white space. The next bracket, we divide that by 2, so now we have an even side on each. And then we just take the main section layout X, so that's this left hand side, and we put it in the middle. Now that may seem really confusing, so I would go over it yourself a few times in your head. Just maybe even draw it down on a piece of paper and write where you're looking from. Build your formula based on your starting point, what you need to work out. Make sure you're using brackets to encapsulate your workings out so that you're making sure the workings happen in an order. Let's just do the same with this one. So the gallery here, the X will be the same. So that now is in the middle of my main section. And let's just pretend for a second that these are toolbars. So tool button 1, tool button 2. Now I want that width to be the same as my toolbar section. So toolbar layout dot width. Same with this one. I want the width to be toolbar dot width. Let's bring the X back to 0 so it's on the left hand side. And let's just bring this one up underneath, strangely, right, dot Y plus right dot height. Cool, so that's in my toolbar section. This is in my main section, then I can line things up in my subsection. Now the really cool thing about this is, actually let's just change this first. Let's not be stupid. We don't want to have to come back and redo these things. So we want this, I think the only thing we need here is the height being our header layout dot height. And actually this is lined up with our header, but now that we've got a section, the Y for this actually should be the toolbar layout dot Y. So now everything's lined up with our second screen. So watch this. This is the really cool thing. Maybe I decide I don't need so much of this subsection. I want this bit to be a little bit bigger. So let's drop this down to 10%. Let's give this a full 80%. Okay, so that's my toolbar section, my main section. My header's too big. Let's drop that down. We don't need such a big header. Drop the height down 50. Toolbar, that needs to be wider. The width is not enough. Let's give that 5 and take 5 away from that. Okay, cool. Look at that, what's happened? My entire app, as soon as I change my sections, now it's updated the entire app and I didn't need to do anything because everything's already lined up with itself. And that is the magic. So I hope you enjoyed that. I know it was a long video and we went through some basic stuff and then we went into some more complicated stuff. But if you start building your apps these way, they're really going to shine out. They're really going to look a lot more clean. They're going to feel a lot more interesting for the user. You're not going to have to go back and make all these different changes. Like, you're really going to see the benefits if you start doing this. I know it seems like a lot of effort in the first instance because it's new and you kind of have to get your brain around how do I do the center. But once you've done it a few times, you're using the same formulas over and over again. And it's just going to become really easy for you. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video. Please remember just to subscribe to my videos and like them, put any comments in, ask any questions. We're going to be looking at some other stuff in the videos that have actually been asked of questions in the comments in the videos. So I do get back to you and I will look into them. Enjoy and share around. Thanks a lot.